You would think that after the success of Kingdom Hearts, Square Enix would immediately get a direct sequel out the door. However, Kingdom Hearts is not as normal, as a man by the name of Tetsuya Nomura is in charge of the franchise, and he wanted to do things differently. For example, instead of making Kingdom Hearts 2 the direct sequel to Kingdom Hearts, the direct sequel would instead be Kingdom Hearts: Chain of Memories. Released for the Game Boy Advance in 2004 and remade for the PlayStation 2 in 2007, Chain of Memories is the direct follow-up to the original Kingdom Hearts. To this day, this remains a divisive entry in the franchise. It mainly comes down to one thing: the gameplay. People don't like the card-based mechanics that Square went for in this game. Now I can get where they are coming from. However, for me, I really like Chain of Memories. Unpopular opinion? Absolutely. But in this video, I hope you'll at least come to understand why I like this game. Before we get started though, I'm going to address some things right up front. 1. I'm not looking at the Game Boy Advance version. I know some people do prefer that version, but I don't have a great way to record the footage for that. Also, I've never beaten the Game Boy Advance version, so because of that, for this video, I'm exclusively looking at the PlayStation 2 remake of the game that's included in the PS4 collection. The second thing to bring up is that for those unaware, there are 2 different story modes in this game. So for the first half of the video, we'll discuss the main story. Then, in the second half, we'll discuss the other story mode. Lastly, this is the second part of my look back at the Kingdom Hearts series. So I'd recommend watching my last video on Kingdom Hearts 1 before watching this one. Now with that out of the way, this is my retrospective review of Kingdom Hearts: Chain of Memories. The game begins immediately after the end of the last game, with Sora, Donald, and Goofy going to find Riku and King Mickey. They end up running into this mysterious castle, thinking that Riku and Mickey are there. Going into the castle, they encounter a mysterious figure in a black cloak. No, not him. A different mysterious figure who looks exactly the same as this new guy. Don't worry, it gets way more confusing. This mysterious figure then makes a statement that will become more important as we go through the game.
In this place to find is to lose, and to lose is to find. That is the way in Castle Oblivion.
Remember this for later. Now this guy somehow makes a card from Sora's memories, which allows our characters to go to Traverse Town. In case you don't get it, whenever I say cards, I do mean actual playing cards. Is it weird? Yes, but that's how the game rolls. Anyways, here we learn that cards dictate everything in the castle. All of the worlds we visit come from cards made from Sora's memories. Even the people you meet in the worlds aren't actually real. They only exist in the castle. Only people you meet between worlds are actually real. Speaking of which, after getting out of Traverse Town, we meet back up with the mysterious figure, and we are introduced to one of the best characters in the franchise.
Hello!
This is Axel. I'll go more in depth about him later, but just know this: he is a genuinely amazing character. After a boss fight with Axel, he gives us more world cards to allow us to go deeper into the castle. Upon going deeper into the castle, we learn that our main trio is losing their memory. But Sora begins remembering someone he thinks he forgot. A girl named Naminé. Now remember earlier when the mysterious figure said this?
In this place to find is to lose, and to lose is to find. That is the way in Castle Oblivion.
As Sora begins to lose his memories, he gains new ones of Naminé, which is why that statement from earlier is so important, as it's this statement that'll define the trajectory of Sora's journey in the game. The more he forgets, the more he remembers Naminé. Of course, there's more to it than that, but we'll save it and a lot of the other reveals for when I return to the story. For now, I want to look at the other aspects of the game, like the presentation, which, compared to the first game, is a mixed bag. This primarily comes down to the game feeling somewhat cheap. A lot of this game feels like it's just recapping the best of Kingdom Hearts 1, from the world selection and character models all being brought over from Kingdom Hearts 1. Cutscenes contribute to this as well, with the characters' lips being synced only to the Japanese voice acting. Also, is it just me, or do the game's cutscenes look noticeably worse than Kingdom Hearts 1? Like, some shots in the cutscenes look noticeably blurry. Not all of them, but in some, you might notice this. I'm not sure if this is because I'm playing the PS4 version, and the cutscenes weren't remastered well, or what. Also in the cutscenes, I noticed more of these blank faces present than in the first game. They were there for sure, but I felt like they did a better job hiding it than in this game, where it is front and center in some of the important story moments. Now this is just nitpicks when it comes down to it. The art style does help a lot to make this game age well, but I would argue that it hasn't aged as well as the first game. What definitely doesn't help with that are the levels. Let me address the elephant in the room. Like I said earlier, levels here are just repeats from the first game, design and all. From Wonderland, Olympus Coliseum, to Hollow Bastion, they all return here, thankfully excluding Deep Jungle, and they look the same. Now I know these worlds come back again in the series, but at least there, they change it up. For Kingdom Hearts 2 especially, all returning worlds are given huge makeovers to make them stand out from their original appearance. Here though, yeah, the rooms you explore are different, but overall it still feels the same. The only new world in the game is Castle Oblivion, and it's just a basic white interior, not much going on there. Yes, I know about Twilight Town, but that originated from Kingdom Hearts 2, which came out before this remake. Now again, the presentation isn't bad, it's just boring, and cheap for the most part. I'm sure this probably came down to budget and timing, but still, this is what I have to look at. Now you might think that this is a Kingdom Hearts game, so of course the music has to be much better than the presentation. Unfortunately, like with the presentation, a lot of it is recycled from Kingdom Hearts 1, primarily with the worlds and levels that you visit. Almost all of the level themes are reused from Kingdom Hearts 1, with the only new pieces of music being for Castle Oblivion and the boss battles in the game. The new pieces of music are really good, but again, a lot of the music is just reused. But I'm not going to complain too much, as again, the music is still really good. One other aspect of the sound that's worth talking about is the voice acting, which is largely great like in the first game. Haley Joel Osment, Bill Farmer, and Tony Anselmo reprise their roles as Sora, Goofy, and Donald. But the major thing to note about the main trio is Sora. He sounds much older than in the last game.
Yeah, it was good to see everyone. But what do you really want from me?
This can be attributed to Osment being around 12 years old when recording the first game, then being around 16 or 17 years old when recording this game. It makes sense, but it could be weird when you look at the game's timeline. Seeing as this game does take place right after the first one, it is slightly strange to see his voice change so drastically. But still, I got over it pretty quickly. Aside from the main trio, the game is mostly made up of new characters. So with that, we get new actors joining the main series. This mainly comes from the villains of the game. The main highlights include Keith Ferguson as the mysterious figure / main villain of the game, and Quentin Flynn as Axel.
My show now, Keyblade Master. Who am I? Oh, my name's Axel. Got it memorized?
There's not much left I have to say about the non-gameplay aspects of the game. So with that, let's actually talk about the gameplay. Now there are two different types of things to talk about when it comes to Chain of Memories: traversal and combat. Let's talk about traversal first. Outside of battles, Sora can roam around the worlds very similar to the first game. The only things he can do are use a 3-hit combo and jump, with you being able to high jump, glide, and, if you look around enough, super glide later on in the game. What I just described to you is about 90% of the gameplay outside of battles. The other 10% is where I have to talk about the cards. Remember earlier when I mentioned that cards control everything in the castle? That wasn't just a story thing. That also applies to the gameplay. For traversal, the cards come up whenever you go to a door. Upon approaching a door, you'll notice a lot of things going on. It could be overwhelming at first, but the main thing you need to watch is at the top of the screen. Here, it'll tell you exactly what you need to open the door. For example, this door says you need a card with a number 2 or higher, or even a 0 card to open the door. This door says you need a blue card with a number 8, a red card with the number 1, and finally, green cards with numbers totaling 20 or higher. And using those cards will allow you to open the door you're at. Another thing to note about these cards is what they do. Depending on the cards you use, this will determine the type of room that you will go into. For example, picking a Moment's Reprieve map card will turn the room you're going to into a save room, whereas using an Almighty Darkness card will spawn a room where Strong Heartless appear. There's a lot of examples I can bring up, but the only ones I'll discuss are the gold cards. Most of them are used to progress the story and get you into the plot relevant rooms. But then, there is the Key to Rewards card. You're able to unlock these after your first battle with Larxene, but the only way you can unlock these cards is after you fight enough enemies. One will just randomly appear. Once you get one, you'll be able to open the rewards room. Upon getting in there, you'll open a chest and get a new ability only available in these reward rooms. Some of these abilities are super good. I would definitely recommend going out of your way to get some of these abilities. With that, we have discussed the traversal of Chain of Memories. It can seem complicated at first, but like with a lot of the gameplay in Chain of Memories, if you take a little bit of time to actually look at the tutorials and experiment with the various room cards, you'll find that it's not that complicated. But is it fun? Sometimes yes, and then other times this system can make you want to pull your hair out, because there will be times where you don't have the correct card needed to open the door. When this happens, the only way to get more room cards is by doing battles, because when you complete a battle, you're given a random room card. Here's the catch: that random room card never ends up being the one you want. It sometimes takes a stupid amount of battles to get the card you need in order to progress. If you end up needing a 0 room card or a 4 card, you'll get every other number instead of the one you actually need. The same thing goes if you need a specific color room card. If you need a red card, you'll always get a blue or a green card, and then eventually, after an unbearable amount of time, you'll get a red card. In my most recent playthrough, this only happened one time, but that one time brought my enjoyment to a screeching halt. But when that doesn't happen, you'll be able to traverse pretty harmlessly. But again, there's always a chance you'll need to grind in order to find the card you need in order to progress. Unless you have a random Joker card, a very rare card that negates a door requirement and is able to help unlock the door with ease. Overall, traversal is a mixed bag. Like I said, most of the time it's harmless, but in my opinion, it's the least interesting part of Chain of Memories gameplay. I say this because the other major component of the gameplay is the combat. So let's start with the basics. When traversing the open areas, you'll see enemies walking around. If they touch you or you hit them, you'll be brought to a combat arena. Here, the only actions you can perform without cards is moving around and dodging by either jumping or dodge rolling. Everything else is done with cards, from attacking, using magic, and using items. You can see the cards available to you in the bottom left corner of the screen. This part of the screen shows the current card available to you, as well as how many cards you have left. When you have run out of cards, you'll see a blank spot with a number on it. This is where you can reload your used cards. But that's just the stuff you can see on the screen. What about actually using your cards? Well, you can use single cards or combine 3 cards together to create a more powerful move called a sleight. Either of these options have unique advantages and drawbacks. Using single cards leads to the player wasting less cards, but the moves are less powerful than sleights. But with sleights, you waste more cards faster, and the first card used in a sleight can't be reloaded. However, there is a way to negate that drawback with sleights, and that's with item cards. In this game, item cards don't restore your health. Only cure cards restore your health. Item cards can restore your card decks without you having to reload your whole deck. Specifically, potions can reload your attack cards, with the better potions being able to reload all attack cards, even ones used in a sleight. Ether cards do the same thing, but for magic cards. So when you add the item cards to the equation, sleights end up for me being the thing I use the most. As for which sleights I use, well, that's where the attack and magic cards come into use. These are pretty self-explanatory. Attack cards are physical attacks with the Keyblade, while magic cards cast magic-based attacks. There are also summon cards. Again, self-explanatory. You summon an ally to help you in battle. This is essentially what the green friend card does as well. Like summon cards, friend cards summon a friend to help you out in battle, and they come with their own special sleights for each friend. Donald and Goofy stay with you throughout the whole game, while the Disney worlds have their own special friend card while you are in said world. Back to the sleights though. Most sleights are cast using 3 attack and 3 magic cards, while some sleights are a mix of magic and attack cards. While I enjoy using sleights, there are some who don't find it as fun. They see it as spamming and not nearly as fun as normal Kingdom Hearts combat. I won't argue that at a certain point it can be seen as spamming, but I still like it, mainly because of the way you can chain these sleights together, and for the fact that these sleights are some of the coolest attacks in the series.
Freeze! Back off! Take this! Take this! Win!
Probably the most famous one is the Lethal Frame Sleight, as a now famous YouTube video showed how spammable this sleight can be. But just spamming the same sleight over and over is easily the most boring way to play Chain of Memories. For me, making a card deck that allows me to pull off cool attacks and prepare for the situation in the best way possible is when the game truly becomes fun. This process begins in the pause menu. Here you could set up a deck for any type of situation, specifically in the Review Decks section of the menu. Here is where a large amount of your time playing the game will take place. This is where you're allowed to customize your card deck for any type of situation. Do you set up for use against a single target for a boss fight? Or use slights that can damage a whole group of enemies? Being able to play the game exactly how you want it is part of the fun of Chain of Memories. One neat thing to note is that when you want a new card deck, you don't need to change all the cards you prepared. You're able to save up to 3 card decks at a time, so you don't have to change every single card anytime you want to change your strategy. During my playthrough, I had a card deck for boss fights, then regular enemies, and then one I changed to work for very specific fights. The results of building these specific card decks speak for themselves.
Back off! Freeze! This is it! There, let's go!
This isn't the end.
There are limitations when it comes to how you can set your card deck up, and that comes in the form of CP, or card points. You see, each card you can add to your deck comes with a cost, that being CP, and your deck only allows for a certain amount of CP at a time. You can increase your maximum CP by leveling Sora up. Leveling up actually comes with multiple options this time around. You can, as stated, level up your CP, level up the amount of health you have, or, on certain level ups, gain a new slight. This adds another level of strategy. Do you give yourself a healthy amount of HP and CP, or do you never touch HP leveling and just level up your CP? It makes for interesting decision making, as your playthrough might be completely different from someone else's. But here is the one thing I do need to bring up. That being, the early game can be pretty bad at points. You don't have any of your cool slides at the start, and you have to work your way up. It can be very slow at times, and very boring, because at the beginning, you do need to grind and level up Sora so he can start getting more CP, and it can become very repetitive at a certain point. But I get it, you do need to have that build up. However, it is something that does need to be noted about Chain of Memories. About the only thing else I can think to talk about in the gameplay are the boss fights. The boss fights in this game as a whole are just fine. Most of them feel like duels, as the boss has their own card deck on the right side of the screen, and to go with that, they have their own slights that they can pull off. It doesn't really matter though, as if you have prepared properly, most bosses won't have a chance to even use their best moves. There are exceptions to this, but this unfortunately goes for most of the boss fights. With that, we have finally completed the gameplay section. Now, let's get back to the story. When we left off with the story, we had just started talking about Naminé. She is one of the major mysteries of the game. The other one is the mysterious organization members roaming the castle. We already met Axel earlier, but there's also Larxene. Larxene is easily the least likable of the villains in this game, but that is certainly intentional. There's Vexen, a scientist who confronts Sora later in the story. Finally, there's the mysterious figure, Marluxia. Seeing these characters interact in the game is a major highlight for me. However, I'll say that they aren't exactly super complex characters either, with most of them having just one personality trait, like Vexen being just a scientist, and Larxene being a total annoyance. Then Marluxia is, well, he has pink hair. That's about it, really. The only really interesting one to me is Axel, because he actually has a full personality and goals, even in just one game. Again though, I still really like these characters and their interactions, especially with how they subtly tease things unknown to the player. But these people aren't the only antagonist on Sora's journey. There's also Riku. Yeah, Riku shows up as an antagonist, wanting to keep Sora away from Naminé. How Riku ended up in Castle Oblivion, and how he knows Naminé, is another one of the game's bigger mysteries. I like how Chain of Memories has a lot of questions going throughout it. It makes the game have a strong story, and for me at least, brings a lot of investment. My major gripe though, is that the answers aren't really given at a good pace. In fact, aside from Riku showing up in the middle of the story, and the occasional glimpses of Naminé, the story moves very slowly, since again, nothing really happens in any of the Disney worlds. It's only when Sora comes face to face with Vexen that the plot begins to pick up the pace, and it doesn't really stop until the end of the game. About halfway through the game, Vexen shows up and reveals that he was the one who brought Riku to us. Sora is obviously upset, because he also thinks Vexen is the reason Riku is upset with him. So they fight each other. Afterwards, Vexen gives Sora a card crafted from another side of his memories, which leads the trio to Twilight Town. Sora has this strange familiarity with this place, but he's not exactly sure how. But I know how. I'm not going to go in depth about Twilight Town and the importance it has to the story. We'll save that for Kingdom Hearts 2. But trust me, this area being here does make sense. Our trio make it to a weird mansion, where Vexen shows back up. After spouting some insane babble about memories, Sora gets mad and another fight ensues. I should mention that this is probably the first battle in the game to be considered a genuine challenge. Vexen's first fight was difficult, but this second phase has some insane sleights he can pull off. By the way, I should mention the number on the cards. Just like with the traversal, the numbers present on your card are very important. If you play a card with a low number, an enemy can break that with a high number card. Same thing goes for sleights. At the beginning of the game, this isn't the biggest deal. However, late in the game, when you have bosses that have borderline one-hit kill moves, having high number sleights becomes a huge deal. One wild card is the 0 card. A 0 card can break any card in the game. A 0 card can even break any sleight in the game. But something to note is that a 0 card isn't invincible. Even though it can break any card or sleight, it can also be broken by any card. So a 0 card is a double-edged sword in that manner. I know I should have put this part in the gameplay section, but I forgot. However, with that tangent out of the way, let's return to the battle with Vexen. After defeating Vexen, we get one of my favorite scenes in the game.
If you continue to seek the girl Naminé, the shackles will tighten. You'll lose your heart and end up becoming Marluxia's pawn!
Marluxia? What does Naminé have to do with... Ugh. Axel!
Yo, Sora! Did I catch you at a bad time? I came to stop you from talking too much by eliminating your existence.
No! Don't do it!
We are just nobodies who have no one to be, yet we still are. But now you can be nothing instead of just being a nobody. You're off the hook.
No! Please don't! I don't want to...
Goodbye.
What are you? What are you people?
Don't know. I wonder about that myself.
I really like this scene. It's such a dark moment, the way Vexen is just killed off so nonchalantly by Axel. And it to me shows why Chain of Memories is one of the darker games in the franchise. But anyways, after this, we learn more about Larxene and Marluxia's motivations. Turns out, they are trying to double-cross the organization they are all working for. The reason Axel kills Vexen was so he could gain the trust of Larxene and Marluxia. Upon gaining their trust, Axel almost immediately betrays them by telling Naminé to leave the room she's been in for the entire game and go find Sora. Yep, Axel was a triple agent, trying to figure out what the others were planning and then undo their plans. After this, Sora runs back into Riku. Riku warns Sora not to go any further. Sora is confused, thinking that with Vexen gone, Riku isn't gonna be mad anymore. But that's not the case, as he wants Sora to stay away from Naminé. Riku then starts going on about how he promised to protect Naminé long ago on their island together. But then Sora states that he was actually the one who promised to protect Naminé, even showing the good luck charm she gave him. But Riku also has that same good luck charm, so Riku proclaims that fakes should be destroyed. And this begins our third battle with Riku. Yeah, I forgot to mention this earlier when talking about Riku, but you fight him 4 times throughout Sora's story. There isn't a whole lot that changes between each fight with him, so it can feel rather samey when fighting him. After beating Riku, he runs away, leaving his charm behind, which turns into another world card. Before heading into the next world though, Donald and Goofy start having some legitimate questions, like how do Riku and Sora have the same charm, and the exact same memories with Naminé? Also, how come Sora only just started remembering her in the castle? Sora doesn't like these questions because he's afraid of logic, so he leaves them behind. This is actually reflected in the game, as for the first time, Donald and Goofy's friend cards are no longer visible during traversal. It's a small touch, but a really cool one. Using the world card brings us to Destiny Islands. After roaming around for a bit, in a boss battle with Darkseid, Sora finds Naminé. For Sora, it's a happy reunion, but for Naminé, it's bittersweet, as it's revealed that Naminé isn't the girl from Sora's memories. Before we can get more info, Naminé disappears, so Sora decides to go back to the castle. We're once again interrupted before we get answers by Riku. Riku decides that we need to fight him for a 4th time. This is the hardest fight with Riku, but like the other ones, if you have a good card deck, you'll be just fine. After beating Riku, he gets a cheap shot on Sora, and then Naminé accidentally scrambles his brain. No, seriously.
I said stop!
Riku?
Larxene shows up to finally answer some major questions we have. The first one being about Riku. Turns out, the Riku we've been fighting in the castle is a fake. Yep, this Riku is a replica created by Vexen. This explains what Vexen meant earlier when he said he brought Riku to us. The second major revelation Larxene drops on us is about Naminé. Turns out, it isn't the castle messing with our character's memories. It's Naminé. Despite hearing the truth about Naminé, Sora still vows to protect her. Larxene decides that she has had enough, but before she can do anything, Donald and Goofy show up and protect Sora. This leads to the final fight with Larxene, which is harder than the previous fight with her. But like Riku, just have a good card deck ready, and you'll be just fine. Afterwards, Larxene dies, and it's time for Naminé to explain herself. She basically reiterates that all the memories Sora had with her are fake. She also states that the reason she did this was because she was lonely. What? Terrible reason aside, she states she can fix it by going to the 13th floor, which conveniently enough is the next and final stop on our journey. Before we can get to the end though, we have one last encounter with Axel, who is currently fighting Marluxia. Marluxia decides to use Naminé as a human shield. He got a hold of her in this cutscene seen here. Axel doesn't care, and Sora, being the good guy he is, refuses to let Axel hurt Naminé. This leads to a second fight with Axel. This is, in my opinion, the second hardest boss fight in the game. Axel seems to have an insane amount of zero cards, constantly breaking my powerful slights. Also, his constant teleporting makes Lethal Frame a lot less useful, as he might teleport and get out of the range of the attack, making it completely useless. But the biggest thing that makes this boss fight difficult is Axel's new attack, Fire Tooth. Put it simply, if you haven't upgraded your health enough, this attack is a one-hit kill move. My best advice for this battle is to have some zero cards ready for when Axel decides to use this attack. After the battle, Axel fades away, and our trio continue to chase Marluxia down. Once they catch up, Marluxia tries to get Naminé to erase Sora's memories entirely, saying that doing so will destroy his heart. Before anything can happen though, Replica Riku shows up saying that he's still gonna protect Naminé, even though he knows he is a fake. Marluxia decides it's time to fight. This begins the first of a 3-phase boss fight with Marluxia. The first phase is easily the hardest. Like with Axel, if you haven't upgraded your health enough, some attacks will just straight up one-hit kill you. Also, his card numbers are very high by this point in the game, so if you don't have a 0 card on hand, Marluxia will likely wipe the floor with you. With that being said though, this first phase is actually my favorite boss fight in the game. This difficulty forced me to change my strategy for this boss quite a bit before I actually beat him. What also helps is that the track for this boss fight is incredible. It makes this fight feel super important, like everything hangs upon this fight, and if our heroes will win. The next 2 phases I'm not as fond of. Phase 2 features an airborne Marluxia, and is way easier than Phase 1. Literally, the only thing interesting about this boss is that this was actually the final phase in the Game Boy Advance version of Chain of Memories. The only other interesting thing is that whatever card deck you use for this fight has to carry over to the final phase of the fight. While this final phase does have great music, this is a pretty lame final boss fight. Most of his attacks are just super annoying, like the one that scatters all your cards across the arena. If I'm being honest, this final phase is probably one of my least favorite final bosses in the franchise. But moving on, after you defeat him, the gang seals the room that they fought him in. Replica Riku decides to go off on his own, realizing he doesn't belong with our group. Then Naminé explains how she can restore our characters' memories. Sora, Donald, and Goofy need to be put back to sleep so Naminé can put their memories back the way they go. The only catch is that they will lose all of their memories of Castle Oblivion. Long story short, they decide to have their memories restored, but Sora promises he will find a way to thank Naminé one day. With that, our trio is put to rest. The last thing we see is Sora beginning to remember Kairi. This concludes Sora's story in Chain of Memories. I still really enjoy Sora's story in Chain of Memories. In particular, I enjoy how much darker this story is compared to the first game, especially with how villains are dispatched, and also the ending, because there is no celebration at the end, only a realization that our journey led us back to where we started. That reason is also why some people don't like it. They feel that Chain of Memories simply exists to get Sora to where he begins in Kingdom Hearts 2. But I really don't mind that, because like I said, I enjoy the story here, but I also enjoy the gameplay. Yep, despite all the problems I see with the gameplay now, I still enjoy it, because of that late game period where you're just able to go crazy with your card powers. Also, making a deck in order to have the best chance to survive in combat makes for some of my favorite moments in the game. Overall, with a story that takes Kingdom Hearts in a darker and more complicated direction that I personally enjoy, and with gameplay that, while it may have some boring moments, ultimately proves to be fun and satisfying. My only question now is, where is the real Riku? The whole reason our main trio walked here was to find Riku and Mickey. So now I'm curious if they're even going to answer that question. Oh yeah, that's right! We can play as Riku in this game. You unlock his story mode upon beating Sora's story. It's not a simple skin swap either. Riku gets his own original story with new gameplay additions. That being said though, I don't want to spend forever talking about this, because a lot of the details for the game carry over to Riku's campaign, such as the music and presentation. But the gameplay and story are very different for Riku. Riku's gameplay is very simplified compared to Sora's. The biggest example of this comes from the fact that you can no longer customize your card deck. Yep, for every level, Riku is given a random batch of cards to use, and you can't change any of it. You have to work with what they give you. Why was this done? Probably to help simplify and speed up the gameplay. Which it does, as even with cutscenes, Riku's story is around only 5 hours long. Another thing that helps Riku's story go by quicker is the Disney worlds. You still go through all the same levels as Sora, but where Sora had 3 gold cards that would progress the story, Riku only has 1. You don't even have cutscenes in any of the Disney worlds like Sora. You just have the boss fight of the world and then you move on. Granted, you still need to find the boss store like Sora, but getting there is a lot easier with Riku. I think you get it. Riku's story is a lot shorter than Sora's, but that's not the biggest difference between the two campaigns. That would be the combat. I've already mentioned the removal of customizing card decks, but there are also a couple of mechanics that help shake up playing as Riku. Enemy cards, dueling, and dark mode. Now for those of you who have played the game, you might be confused by the enemy card statement, because you could use enemy cards in Sora's campaign. So why am I explaining them for Riku's story? Well, before I explain why I'm doing that, let me first explain how enemy cards work. After you defeat a boss, a card with the enemy's face on it will be dropped. Each card has an ability associated with it. For example, the Maleficent card increases physical attack card damage, and Jafar makes it to where the next 20 cards can't be broken by the enemy. These aren't infinite though. Maleficent only lasts for 30 attacks, and Jafar only lasts for 20 cards. Each card has their own abilities that they add and limit for how long they last. I should note that for Sora, you have to add these to your custom decks. I say that because Riku doesn't have to do that. Like I said, Riku can't customize his card deck, so the enemy cards are automatically added. This makes them a lot more useful for Riku than for Sora in my opinion. As again, with Sora, the enemy cards had a high CP cost associated with them, making it difficult to include them in your card decks. But again, Riku doesn't have that holding him back. This is why I chose to hold off talking about them until now. Having all those cards available immediately upon defeating bosses made them an essential part of my time with Riku. I started almost every battle by equipping the Maleficent card and doing big damage at the beginning of the fight. Then, for longer fights, use the Jafar card to make sure no one can break my cards. Finally, the Oogie Boogie card was maybe the most important villain card when I got him, and was essential during certain boss fights. I'll discuss why later, but that's all I have to say for the enemy cards. I think that they are far more useful than in Sora's story, but again, it should be noted that this isn't a Riku exclusive feature. Unlike Dark Mode. Dark Mode is maybe the most important new feature for Riku. You may have already noticed this new meter above the Riku health icon. Whenever Riku breaks an enemy card, the bar slowly fills up. Upon breaking enough cards, Riku will transform into Dark Mode. In this mode, Riku's attacks are slightly modified, along with getting a better dodge roll. But the biggest change is that in Dark Mode, Riku can actually perform slights. He doesn't have many, but they are all still pretty cool. These include Dark Firaga, Dark Break, and Dark Aura. Keep in mind though, that if an enemy breaks enough of your cards, or damages Riku enough, you'll be knocked out of Dark Mode. You'll be using Dark Mode in almost every battle in Riku's story, as those slights allow Riku to do insane damage to enemies throughout the story. You'll especially find that dark mode comes in handy during the boss fights, allowing you to just decimate bosses' health bars. Another thing that helps Riku destroy bosses is the final mechanic exclusive to his story: card dueling. How this works is that when Riku and the enemy play a card with the exact same number, you'll get an option to duel with the enemy. The way these duels work is that an enemy card will pop up, and you need to break that card with a higher number card. In the upper right corner, you'll see the amount of cards you need to break in order to win the duel, and the amount of time you have to win the full duel. Upon winning the duel, Riku will perform an extremely powerful attack. When you're fighting a group of basic enemies, Riku will likely perform an attack that hits multiple enemies. But when winning a duel in a boss fight, Riku will do an attack that primarily targets a single enemy. But if you lose a duel, Riku will be stunned and can't move for a couple of seconds. If this happens during a boss fight in particular, Riku will take big damage. When you combine not only this, but the other things that I've mentioned, playing as Riku feels dramatically different than playing as Sora. It's because of those previously mentioned mechanics that I shockingly enjoyed Riku's story more than Sora's. I enjoyed how much damage he can do in such a quick succession. I love the unplanned duels that can completely change the flow of battle, and getting into dark mode and using all the slights available to Riku. All of these make playing as Riku such a blast. However, just because Riku has all of these things I've mentioned, doesn't make his story super easy. In fact, it's quite the opposite at times. This is mainly because of one change. Riku can't heal himself. Or rather, he can't readily heal himself. Let me explain. Riku doesn't have the cure card like Sora did. The only way Riku can heal during battles is by using the Mickey friend card or the Oogie Boogie enemy card. Mickey does an area of effect move that heals Riku along with reloading his card deck, whereas the Oogie Boogie card gives Riku a slight bit of health 10 times. But that's it. If a Mickey card doesn't show up and you have already used the Oogie Boogie card, you can't heal during a battle. Outside of battle, you can attack certain objects in the environment and possibly obtain health orbs or go to a safe spot and heal there. This makes Riku's campaign a lot harder at certain spots compared to Sora's, but it kind of balances it out at most points. Since Riku's exclusive abilities, mentioned earlier, can do insane damage, it encourages a more aggressive playstyle for Riku, so enemies can't get a chance to damage you. The last thing to mention when it comes to changes exclusive to Riku is reloading cards. Sora could also reload his card deck. However, it takes more time with Sora compared to Riku. Here, you just tap the attack button on this blank card, and your deck is instantly reloaded. With that, we have gone through the main differences between Riku and Sora's gameplay. The only thing left to discuss is the actual story of Riku's time in Castle Oblivion. I'm not going to do a beat-by-beat recap of Riku's story, like I did with Sora. Instead, I'm going to mainly talk about certain points I enjoyed within Riku's story. The first one being that we got more time with the organization members populating the castle. This includes the introduction of Zexion and Lexius. I personally find these two to be rather boring, especially since they die in this game and aren't ever really important again. But their interactions with the other organization members are fun to watch. However, this pales in comparison to the other things that shine in Riku's story, like Replica Riku. In Sora's story, Replica Riku, who I will now refer to as Riku 2, came off as another antagonist with a late game twist. But here, Riku 2 is revealed to be a tragic character, who is manipulated by the organization members within the castle. He didn't start out having those fake memories of Naminé, they were forced upon him. In a way, it psychologically broke him. At the beginning of Riku's story, we find him as a cocky brat who wants to be better than Riku. But by the end, Riku too is unable to get past the fact that he is just an imitation, a copy of something that already exists. This emotional state of the character is delivered perfectly by Riku's voice actor, David Gallagher.
That's right. I'm a phony. A fake. The way I look, the way I feel, everything I remember. And even this newfound power. I thought by finding some new strength, I could finally be someone who's not at all you. But nothing changes. I'm still just empty. Everything about me is borrowed. As long as you're around, I'll never be more than a shadow!
David potentially gives his best performance in the entire franchise. He manages to distinguish the different Rikus from each other, while making you truly feel sorry for Riku too, especially in his death scene.
So, it's over. Death doesn't frighten me. Good riddance to a phony life. My heart was never real. I'm sure even what I'm feeling now is probably all fake. What are you feeling? What happens when a fake dies? One like me. Where will my heart go? Does it disappear? It'll go somewhere. Maybe to the same place as mine. A faithful replica until the very end. That's okay.
The final thing that makes me enjoy Riku's story is Riku himself. Chain of Memories has a hard task, taking a character who was the main antagonist in the original game and making him a hero. Yet, the game manages to succeed in this mission, thanks to developing Riku by having him fight his inner darkness in Ansem. Yes, Ansem was destroyed in the previous game, but the best I could tell is that Ansem here is just a manifestation of the darkness that's still present in Riku's heart. Through the story, Riku decides that instead of destroying all the darkness within him, he decides to use the darkness. This is shown in gameplay through the previously discussed Dark Mode, but Riku still has some light on his side through his companion, Mickey. Yep, Mickey occasionally shows up to help Riku out, finally reuniting near the end of Riku's story. I like how this game sets up the friendship between Riku and Mickey, making them a fun duo to contrast the main trio. I do want to quickly bring up Diz as well. He's another new character introduced in Riku's story. He shows up late into the game, so he doesn't add much to the overall story, but I do want to mention him because he becomes one of the most important characters in the franchise later on. But back to Riku. He has to come to terms with what he did in Kingdom Hearts 1. This is easier said than done though, as remember, Riku did a lot of bad things in Kingdom Hearts 1. It isn't until he defeats Zexion with the help of a disguised Naminé that Riku decides to finally use the power of darkness to his advantage. Then, in the end, he manages to defeat Ansem, and decides to help Naminé on her mission to restore Sora's memories. This technically isn't the end of Riku's redemption, as this story continues on in Kingdom Hearts 2, but we'll get to that when we actually review Kingdom Hearts 2. Ultimately, this story accomplishes what it set out to do, which is to get the player to root for Riku and his journey. It's also why I enjoy this story more than Sora's. He forgets that this journey ever happened, but with Riku, his character is defined by his journey for the rest of the series, making his story, in my opinion, the more impactful one when it's all said and done. With that, we have finally gone through the entirety of Chain of Memories. Honestly, replaying this for the video has left me disappointed. I was hoping that I could say that people who didn't like this game were crazy, that I couldn't see all the flaws that they saw in this game. But I did see the flaws, and I actually agree with a lot of them. The game can be super repetitive at times. Early parts of Sora's story can be really slow and boring. Environments just feel like a repeat of Kingdom Hearts 1, and the story can be seen as unnecessary. All of these complaints do begin to add up, and they can't really be ignored when playing the game. But even with that, I can't help but love Chain of Memories. Yes, the beginning part can be boring, but it's all worth it in order to use those crazy moves at the end of Sora's story. When you add the Riku story to the overall package, I have a blast going through it. Then there's the story itself, which is honestly one of my favorites in the franchise. It can be considered non-important at certain times in the series, but to me, this is an essential part within Kingdom Hearts, thanks to the introduction of the mysterious organization, Naminé, and Diz. It's not my favorite story, but it's one I'll always enjoy. That statement can go for my thoughts on the full game as well. It's not my favorite, but it's still an incredibly fun time. This concludes my retrospective look back at Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. When we return, we will be looking at the fan favorite Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix. Until then, thanks for watching.